Obrad has taunted me to challenge Mr. McEwen, but I'm not going to do it. And I would be out of my depth in this discussion of the spiritual basis of democracy. But I find it really fascinating to hear someone speak about America as if it's their country, another place, somewhere else. It's a foreign country, because the rest of the world feels that America is like this thing that hovers over all of us. And it's almost, I almost feel as entitled to discuss the internal dynamics of the country, what happens, as if I were a citizen. And sometimes I agree with people who think that we should all have the right, the rest of the world should have the right to vote in your presidential elections, because the outcome of your presidential elections determines often our destinies. Nowadays, of course, I think that maybe at least we Serbs, should get a chance to vote in the Russian presidential elections, because things that Mr. Putin is doing are going to determine our lives here, I'm afraid. Which brings me to Obrad's initial question of democracy versus authoritarianism. My personal take on that is that it's just Mr. Biden's tired, old, outdated attempt to present the world as he saw it, I guess, 70 years ago when he first entered politics. And now he calls it authoritarianism, but it used to be democracy versus communism. That's what it was, and he's just using an old rhetorical device or, Cold War slogan and trying to apply to a somewhat different world. And in this case, Ukraine and Russia, I think it's a poor choice because it's not like Ukraine was this wonderful democratic country that we need to defend. Well, of course, South Vietnam was not a wonderful democratic country that maybe could be a poster country for democracy. But Ukraine seems to be a uniquely bad candidate for a model democracy. Because I'm someone who's West-centric. I've never been to Russia. I don't speak Russian. The United States of America are my point of reference. When we discuss freedom of speech, freedom of the press, my first instinct for many years has been, let's compare to what it's like in America. They have freedom of press. Let's see how ours compares to theirs. And it's in American sources. The reason I bring this up is that it is from American sources that I've heard that Ukraine was maybe one of the most corrupt nations on earth. At least that seemed to be the consensus before Putin attacked Ukraine. But I am bringing this up because I come from the world of journalism, and that world is a world of comparison, parallel analogies. And when I look at the United States today, including the way Mr. Biden is framing his foreign policy, where the organizational concept is democracy, I have to compare it to when, I guess, 30 years ago, the United States began interfering for the first time in the affairs of my nation. And what Obrad has listed, lack of faith in institutions, loss of confidence in the media, you can't trust anyone, we're polarized, we're two bitterly opposed camps who do not believe anything the other side says. Well, that's what a Yugoslavia that was breaking up, that's what it was 30 years ago. And the Americans came, United States Agency for International Development came, and they said, look, your people do not trust the media is full of poison, and it's poisoning people's minds against other ethnic groups or other members of your own group that had different concepts and different ideas of politics. The reason for that is that you had a communist press. You didn't have freedom of speech. You didn't have freedom of the press. That's why your press is so awful, and that's why you cannot convince anyone of anything. That's why arguments do not work. That's why facts are not taken for granted, and that's one of the roots of your problem. So they said, we'll help you develop a free press. Well, looking at America today, it's like Return to the Future. It's like a rerun, except, I almost have more sympathy, more understanding for the people of a broken Yugoslavia who had just lost all the pillars that had sustained our world collapsed at the same time. And then there was, we were losing a country, losing a system, losing our homes. And so maybe the level of despair and disorientation was perhaps more understandable than it is for me today to see a United States filled with anger for everyone of a different political or ideological persuasion. And when I hear Americans complain about how they can't trust their media, or, it's not like that they complain, but what I've recently read? That let's call it the popularity of Donald Trump, for example. The numbers have practically not changed. He polls about the same way he did 2 years ago. He polls about the same way he did around the 6th of January. Since then, before then as well, but since then, the entire mainstream media establishment has been, I could say propagandizing against him, but it's certainly been against him, attacking him, criticizing him, reviewing every action of his. He's been almost like he's being looked at as if he'd been an insect, and we need to look at everything he did and how he's caused damage. And yet, you look at those poll results, and the needle hasn't changed. About the same number of people think what they thought of Donald Trump 2 years ago, which for me is pretty demonstrative of the fact that they don't, but it's not even that they don't trust the media, it's that the media have no power anymore to alter anyone's opinions. And the reason they have no power to alter anyone's opinion is that not just that people do not believe in the facts, but that it seems to go beyond this belief is what is an objective fact. For example, it appears that about the same percentage of people who on January 6th believed that the election had been stolen from Donald Trump, still 40% of America today believes the election was stolen from Donald Trump. And when I say believe, what I mean by that is that these people feel we've lost the election, that loss is a theft. Something was taken away from us. And, I recently read an article in which someone is interviewing a miner from Appalachia, a county that voted 80% for Donald Trump at elections. And he is talking about what it was like when Donald Trump came to his community. And he said he came and, the rural whites, but rural population in America feels that they're the losers, the economic losers, and they have been the economic losers of globalization and everything. So Trump came to Appalachia and said, I'll bring back coal production. You'll dig coal again. And this miner says, I didn't think he'd bring back coal production, but when he looked at me and I felt that he saw me and that he knew what a loss I've experienced. And people who experience that kind of loss, they feel that something was stolen from them. So so what's fascinating for me is that the numbers, the investigation of the voting process, it's something that's been discussed for 2 years. Every time on CNN they mention the fact that Trump thinks the election was stolen, they always say Trump's baseless accusations, the big lie that the election was stolen. And none of this moves the needle one little bit. So clearly it's not a matter of do we trust the facts? It's this underlying problem where I want to know whose side you're on. So this Appalachian miner seemed to feel that Donald Trump was on his side, and that he was on his side was enough for him to vote for, and he didn't have to believe his words about bringing back coal production. So I'm talking about this because it seems to me that this applies to what my American journalist friends told me 30 years ago. Ljiljana, if only you had a decent press, if only you had built up standards, if only your journalism schools taught journalism the way we do, and in our journalism school we tell our students, if your mother tells you she loves you, don't believe it, verify. Don't take anything for granted. But it has, in the meantime, it seems to me that today's America resembles more the Yugoslavia, which was breaking up politically. Of course, let's be clear. America has a wonderful press, and I'm sorry that the business model has become cultivating one audience. Everybody's, and it's the same business model here. It used to be that everyone was racing for, at least it seems to me that everyone used to fight for the center, the middle ground. Now no one is interested in the middle ground. There's a total vacuum in the middle because no one's fighting for it. It's people want to express, people want to explain to you who they hate. And it almost doesn't matter what you believe in, but do you hate the same people? Do you see the same? We have become a group with those who feel they've been robbed by the same individual. So we had a country that was breaking up, and people were terrified for what was happening to them, and they had good reason not to believe the press, and they had good reason not to believe their elites, and they knew that they were going to be the losers, and that something was being stolen from them. And I am not putting any, I'm not going to take this moral attitude, like, look at these Americans, they don't believe anything. They're full of venom and bitterness and angry at each other. It seems to me this happens in crisis situations. It seems to me I should not have despised my own countrymen when they were afraid, disoriented, didn't know what was going to happen to them, and they didn't believe anyone, and they were looking for anyone who would recognize the fear in them, and they were going to side with that side. But this is also why I find it so difficult to believe in these slogans, the democracy versus authoritarianism or democracy versus communism. And Russia, we said why Ukraine wasn't a good fit. But look at Russia. Americans were so pleased with Russia when Yeltsin was in charge. Now, what do you think that tells Russians? That the Americans' favorite president was the one under which they lost the same things that the Appalachian miner lost after America was deindustrialized, basically. And look at Europe now. Europe, I saw this Belgian prime minister who is saying, I think 2 days ago, people are going to be angry. We may have social unrest. Europe may be facing deindustrialization. And I'll just finish with this. I consider it utterly disgusting to have a nation, a population, a large segment, which is scared of the future, which is losing, which has legitimate economic grievances, which sees that it is going to be the loser in a process that's taking place, and to then say these people are awful, they're fascists. That's why they're complaining, because they're fascists. And one of the most disconcerting things today about America, because when I first started visiting America, it was a place of incredible civility. In fact, it was the place that Mr. McEwen has described. You know, we see this, what's our priority, first come life, and, you know, this pursuit of happiness. I am a big fan of the fact that they put this in their founding documents, pursuit of happiness. That there's no country in the world, there's no empire, no group like that sees an individual's pursuit of happiness as a goal. So all these things I love. But when I first came to know America, it was a land of civility. Now they're calling each other fascists and Hitlers. And you very quickly realize that it's not about fascism. I mean, you know, even Orwell in 1946 was already saying fascism no longer means anything as a term. It only means something that someone whom we don't like coming to power. So it's never about democracy. It's my experience is it's never about democracy. It's always about power. It's who we want elected in certain countries. We want, when the right people get elected, we praise them, or we pretend that we don't see that they are. You know, it's like the United States helps groups in Syria which are Islamic fundamentalists. And yet in Iran, they pretend they can't stand that women are made to wear the hijab and that this is a matter of woman power. And actually, it's not a matter of woman power. It's always we want the women we like to be in power and not these other ones. So the most disconcerting thing to me is how everyone's become a fascist and everyone's become a Hitler. I remember that very painfully from the time the president of the country I lived in was being compared to Hitler every day. That's why I'm very susceptible to people doing it here nowadays in our country. I think it's horribly wrong. We could have learned that it was wrong when we were being demonized. And I don't know why we do it to ourselves, but I certainly do understand why outside forces, outside powers do it to each others, and it's the same. And once you start calling everyone a Hitler, lo and behold, pretty soon you're calling your neighbor a fascist because they're not voting the way you want it. I'm sorry if I spoke too little about journalism, but I can come back to that.
Plenty.